Hello, I'm Penny Thornton and welcome to my astrology channel. On this video, I'm going to be looking at the month ahead for Virgo, and that's November 2020. Now, it would be nice and easy if we could stick a little label on the month, but I think it's got a lot to do with getting your head on. By that, I mean clearing the fog away and finally being able to see your priorities, your way forward, a whole lot of other things. Of course, I'll get into that in a minute. The other thing that I want to say, just in case you're not used to my way of looking at astrology, I'm quite down to earth. And I also don't think things are making you do this, that, and the other. Sometimes I say something to that effect, but we're always in the driver's seat. It's us who are carving out our own life based on the events that happen to us. And so what I do in these videos is really show you the shape of things to come so that you can adapt accordingly and be prepared. And if there's one thing that Virgos like to do, it's to be prepared. Okay, so I'm going to bring a chart up here so that we can see what's going on. And the first thing we're going to look at is Virgo here on the left-hand side here in the first house, the beginning of the whole horoscope wheel. And as you can see, all the planets are set out around that circle. And that's why it's different from sign to sign. I mean, basically, the planets are always the same. They're always in some sign, angling another planet, but it's from your perspective that we're interested in. And of course, during the month of November, the sun will be moving through this area of your horoscope. And so it's all about communications. It's about, well, I hesitate to say travel because not a lot of people are traveling anywhere at the moment. Although the idea of movement and getting from A to B is both a metaphor as well as being kind of literal. And in fact, what you may find you're doing is a lot of short journeys. You're out and about quite a lot. You're dealing with your community. You've got a lot of things happening in your immediate kind of circle. But I think the other important thing about this area of the horoscope is it has to do with communication in the sense of having important dialogues and discussions with people, and perhaps preparing plans with a view to those plans being activated maybe next year. You can be looking quite far into the future rather than the next day. And I think given this little planet here, Uranus, which is very active in November, you really need to keep your plans loose because they could change, not necessarily day by day, but they will change. And it's good to have that kind of mindset that says, okay, let's do it in a different way. Let's move that date. Let's have a different group of people. Whatever it is you have to do, adapt. That's the important thing with Uranus, because there's usually one way you can't go anymore. And therefore you have to have a detour. And you know, the fact that Uranus has been in this area of the chart for you for a couple of years, and we've had Mercury in retrograde for the last couple of weeks, and there are some other factors also in the mix, that sort of disruptions and delays and diversions have been a bit of an occupational hazard. But what I would say about that is that, of course, you know, necessity is the mother of invention. So whatever developments have happened that have sort of thrown you out, thrown your agenda out, thrown you off kilter, something new has been born out of those events. And it will continue to be that kind of story as we go through November. I want to explain the reason why. As we came into November, October the 30th, 31st, there was a full moon. The sun just at the beginning of Scorpio, opposition the moon in Taurus, up close and personal to Uranus. So the end of October was very rocky. And now sometimes, of course, when things are rock and roll, they can be quite exciting. But I think really, for most people, they were quite, well, they weren't easy. And we saw and will see perhaps a lot of events around this, you know, entry into November as being very, very destabilizing and very unsure where we go from here. But of course, you know, this idea that something new is coming into the arena, you'll want also to look for this when the moon is in Leo, angling Uranus, which it does on the 7th of November. As we get down here to the 14th, there'll be a new moon And in fact, just before that, the moon will oppose Uranus again. And then as we come round here, we come to the 20th of the month, the moon here in Aquarius, also squaring up to Uranus. That's really another time of sudden changes. But I also like to think of Uranus, especially here, as it's a long-term resident, in the area of thought and communication and wide horizons, that a lot of epiphanies and awakenings can happen in November. And of course, they will prove to be incredibly important. Now, as the month opens, we've got Mercury here in the second house, angling Saturn here in the fifth house. And this is an angle of tension. So it may be that the latter part of October coming into November, a lot of things got thrown up in the air, and maybe some things really quite difficult for you to get your head around. But you've got a good mind and a good attitude, and you can work things out, and it needs a practical bent, really. It's no good emoting, you've got to get practical. And because Mercury is retrograde on the 1st, and it moves direct on the 3rd, Mercury will square up again to Saturn at the end of the week on the 6th of November. So I see this whole period of that first week of November being something where you're trying very hard to get something in shape. And maybe it's not easy, and maybe you don't feel terrific about it. Maybe there's a generally gloomy kind of feel to that opening to the month. But always the answer to something that's difficult is to do what we can with it. And, whether this is something personal, whether we're looking at events out on the world and seeing, because we do experience all that vicariously, by the end of the week, there should be some understanding. So it should be further ahead. And remember, I said November is about getting your head on, it's about getting clarity. And I'll explain that a little bit more when I come a little bit closer to the end of the month. Now, also, that Mercury and Saturn link is linking the areas of finance on the one hand and creative endeavors on the other. And of course, some of our creative endeavors are our children. So there could be issues with money and your children. Are they spending too much? Do you need to spend more money on them? Is there a problem with money and your children? Or is there a problem per se with children? So that might be where it's coming from. But what I would also say in terms of creative endeavors, things to do with perhaps projects that you've got on, work projects, other kinds of projects, there may be a bit of a glitch at that early part of the month, and you might need to go back to the drawing board and rework it. But please be practical, Virgo, because sometimes we all find that irritating, don't we? Something is rejected or it doesn't work, and we just moan. We'd like to throw it out of the window. We'd like it never to have happened. But actually, once we go back and we rework it sometimes, often we come out with a much better deal. Now, in fact, this whole little cluster of planets here, Jupiter, Pluto, and Saturn, have been in this area of your chart for the past year. And in a way, they have been the background or the signature on the coronavirus. And so this has certainly crushed your ability to be a free agent. It's meant that you've had to accept a lot of limitations. And maybe you haven't liked some of the things that have happened because you've lost things, or things haven't worked and you've had to cast them aside. So it's been difficult. And maybe in the process, you felt sometimes that things have been very unfair. But of course, we can't sort of point fingers and the blame. What we've got to do is just keep on going. And one of the interesting things about early part of November, we're looking at the November the 12th here, is that we get the third connection between Jupiter and Pluto. The first one occurred on the 5th of April, the second at the end of June. And so you may be able to link those two times and think, oh, something came up then. It looked very promising, or something came up and it was a mess. But there's a relationship between these three times in some regard. And when you come to the last time that a planet is, planets are forming very powerful connections, that's always the most powerful time of all. There could be a terrific breakthrough here. Something could really come up trumps for you, probably in the area of creativity, maybe again linked to children or those things that are pet projects close to your heart. Could even be a love affair, something like that. I'm going to talk about love affairs shortly. And so we have the potential for that to be a very good period. But never forget that Pluto is the principle of elimination. It's that planet where we prune the dead wood away in order for abundance in the spring. And sometimes events happen, they take something away from us, and into that vacuum, which may take a little while, comes that growth. And you need to have that thought process going as we come to that middle of the month in particular. Now, I said I talk about relationships and love affairs, and the reason I'm going to come to that is this planet here, Neptune. Neptune has been in the area of relationships for, oh gosh, years, but it's only active when it really connects with something in your natal chart or your sun sign. So at the moment, and for much of this year, it's been those of you with 7th to 11th, 12th of September birthdays, you've been under Neptune. And those of you who've got the Neptune square, which means you're in your early 40s. Now, Neptune, and before I go any further and you kind of shut your ears because you think, oh, I wasn't born then and I'm not 40 or 42, 43. The thing is that you may have planets which are around 17 to 20 degrees of the mutable signs, particularly Pisces. And I promise you that's just as active. And here's a clue as to whether Neptune is in fact affecting you. And that's if you feel things are slipping through your fingers. You know, you had an idea and it went nowhere. You had a relationship and suddenly it was gone. You had lots of plans, but they never got traction. That's such a Neptune experience. And then, of course, what sets in is doubt. What did I do wrong? Am I doing the right thing? Is this right for me? And so you end up in a puddle of confusion. Hence my suggestion at the start of this video, get your head on, get clarity. Because this is sort of what is offered in towards the end of this month, if not on and off during the month, this idea of getting clarity. And for a lot of you Virgos, it may be linked to a love affair or to a relationship of some description. Could be a working relationship, could be a relationship like marriage, but you know, something where you and another person are involved. And you know, one of the things that's difficult to come by with Neptune is sometimes reality. We want to believe what we want to believe, and sometimes people let us down because they're not really who we thought they were. And in the area of relationships, sometimes we get betrayed and let down. And that is something you'll need to think about, especially if you're in those age groups and those birthday groups that I've mentioned, or you're really resonating with those themes I've just mentioned. Why it's going to be important to look at the gestation of a relationship is because of this penumbral eclipse, which comes up at the end of the month. And that's another kind of period when we think about, is this relationship built to last? Because if this relationship is not built to last, it's the eclipse that tends to seek it out. But in as much as things, get closure, they pave the way for new beginnings. And so new beginnings follow, perhaps with new relationships with people who come into your life, and you know instantly that person is meant for me. That's going to be a relationship of supreme importance. But I'm slightly getting ahead of myself because I want to look at Mars as well. Mars is in the area of money. And remember, when I was looking at Mercury here, I was talking about money, perhaps in regard to children or expenses, but just money, period. When we get Mars here, sometimes when we have relationships with banks and lending institutions and credit card companies, we're in business partnerships, we're in life partnerships where money is part of the journey. Mars can upset things. So if for the last 6 months you felt you've been on a kind of war footing with people about money, it may be about to start to settle down. Now, it's not going to go immediately. Maybe by the end of the month, you'll start to see that some things are not as aggravating as they were. And of course, with that Jupiter-Pluto conjunction, and also the eclipse, we may be looking at some kind of financial deal or some other kind of deal that means a period of arguing and upset is over. But I'm going to end with this lunar eclipse because the sun is in the area of home and family, the moon in the area of life direction and career and life goals. It has a relationship with the new moon that occurred up here back in May the 22nd. So if you again think back to that period and think, what did I begin then? What was happening at that time? Because what is going to happen at the end of November is that there's going to be some kind of resonance and the potential either for something to be completed, done and dusted, or for there to be a reckoning of some description and you move on in a different direction from that point. I would certainly say that the end of November, with Neptune turning direct and a lunar eclipse, this is a very fateful time. And you have to have that kind of attitude to events. You have to say, look, it was in the stars, it was destiny, but hey, just because that happened doesn't mean I'm powerless. I can't rewind the clock, but what I can do is look at all the different options that are now raised, and there will be more than one option. And I think, that is one of the lessons to have come out of the coronavirus year, is that we've had to adapt. Necessity has been the mother of invention, and we're entering a new world. And I'll be talking about that a little bit more on my other videos, the new world of Aquarius. And really the old ways are no longer applicable. So a lot of the things that are happening this year, but certainly in November, are about, they're not going to be there. They're not going to be any use for the rest of the journey as you enter this new territory. So, Virgo, thank you for watching. And I'll be back to talk about your month ahead in December, next month. And of course, on my twice monthly videos. Bye for now.